Have you ever had that specific daydream? You know the exact one I'm talking about.
Oh, I think we all have a version of it, right?
Right, exactly. Like you're just sitting at your desk, maybe you're staring blankly at a massive spreadsheet, or you're folding just a mountain of laundry at home.
Yes, the mundane everyday stuff.
Yeah, the mundane stuff, and suddenly you just get this incredibly vivid, honestly kind of melodramatic vision of packing up your entire existence, just, throwing it all in a bag.
Tossing the sensible life out the window.
Totally. Tossing the sensible 401k contributing, very safe life right out the window. And you imagine moving to the densest, most chaotic part of the city to live this purely artistic, fiercely bohemian existence.
A very specific aesthetic. Yeah.
Right. You picture like a tiny, drafty apartment with exposed brick, maybe a leaky skylight.
Oh, a skylight is mandatory for this fantasy.
Mandatory. And you picture yourself just painting or, writing the days away, surviving on nothing but black coffee and pure inspiration. And this is despite the glaring obvious fact that you have absolutely no money to your name.
Which is the core of the fantasy, really. The lack of money is somehow romantic.
Right. It's a powerful, persistent human fantasy. And I just want to say, if you have ever entertained it, even for a fleeting second during your morning commute, you are in incredibly good company.
You really are.
Because you are sharing a daydream with one of the greatest, most sophisticated songwriters in American history. So, welcome to episode 78 of Porter-Pedia, our ongoing exploration into the world, the work, and the incredibly colorful life of Cole Porter.
It is, it's a profound, almost universal fantasy, that daydream you just described. Though I find it so fascinating that we still romanticize the precise flavor of poverty that Porter is going to describe today.
It's intoxicating, right? That idea of shedding the practical for the purely creative.
It is deeply intoxicating, especially when you realize that someone who is so known for his utter impenetrable worldliness captured that exact innocent yearning. He captured it before he built up his protective shell of cynicism.
Yeah, the famous Cole Porter armor. So today, our mission for this session is to really unpack the cultural references dropped in a true deep-cut list song from 1920. It's a song called Washington Square.
A fantastic, very revealing piece of work.
It really is. We are pulling out the microscope on this one. And, for those of you who've been with us on this journey for a while, you'll remember we've already dissected the lyrical architecture in Porter's songs like Farming or You're the Top.
Right, the classics.
Yeah, and They Couldn't Compare to You, and of course the legendary Anything Goes. So I highly encourage you to check out those earlier sessions if you haven't already. They set the stage perfectly for what we're doing today.
They really do provide a necessary foundation, because when you analyze those later works, those big hits, you see a master operating at the absolute peak of his powers.
Right. Oh, totally. Using cultural touchstones as weapons, basically.
Exactly, weapons of wit. But looking at an early piece like Washington Square requires a completely different analytical lens.
Yeah.
We aren't looking at the penthouse. We are looking at the foundational blueprints of his style.
I completely agree. And I have to mention right here at the top, if you are enjoying this type of rich exploration, if you love peeling back the layers of history hidden in music, you absolutely must buy the book Porter-Pedia.
Oh, it's essential reading.
It really is. It explains every single reference Cole Porter ever dropped. We are talking about over 2,600 of them in total.
It's a monumental piece of historical detective work.
It's wild. And we've linked it right in the description for you, so definitely grab that. Also in the description, there is a link to a phenomenal performance of today's song, Washington Square.
It's an amazing rendition. You really must hear it.
You absolutely must hear it to get the full experience. And you will find the complete lyrics right there as well.
Having that auditory context, it just cannot be overstated. I mean, reading a lyric on a page is akin to looking at a dormant engine. It's interesting, but it isn't moving.
Right, it's just text.
Yes, but when you hear the melody paired with the words we're about to discuss, it brings the entire mechanism to life. It entirely changes your understanding of the piece's rhythm and its intent.
So true. So let's look at our map for today. Our journey is guided by a fantastic historical article that explores Porter's 1920 Bohemian Dream, the actual surviving lyric sheet for Washington Square, and a remarkably rich reference index of Greenwich Village culture from that specific era.
It's a great collection of source materials.
It really is. And honestly, discovering this 1920 song, it feels like stumbling upon an early earnest sketchbook from a master painter. Imagine finding a charcoal drawing by Picasso from when he was, say, 18, long before he developed his famous signature cubist style.
Right, before it became the Picasso we all recognize.
Exactly. He's just drawing a bowl of fruit, trying to get the shading right. That's what this feels like. It's Porter before he became the Cole Porter. It's raw, it's remarkably sincere, and I find it completely fascinating.
The Picasso analogy definitely holds water, but I would argue the shift in Porter is almost even more dramatic.
Oh, really? How so?
Well, when we think of Cole Porter, we think of the supreme chronicler of transatlantic cafe society. We picture him sipping champagne in Venice or holding court in a Waldorf Astoria suite.
Wearing a tuxedo, naturally.
Naturally, we expect a level of sophisticated cynicism, a razor-sharp, urbane wit that looks down on the world with a knowing smirk. But here, in 1920, he is a young songwriter in a massive transitional phase, and that smirk hasn't fully formed yet.
That's such a great way to put it. The smirk is still under construction. Let's set the scene for you so you can really visualize this. It is 1920. Porter is writing for a toe called As You Were.
A relatively early endeavor for him.
Yeah, he is just a few years out of Yale, where he was, frankly, a popular cheerleader and essentially a wealthy kid from Indiana desperately trying to fit into the East Coast elite.
He was very conscious of his outsider status early on.
Definitely. So he is dipping his toes into early Broadway, but he hasn't cemented that larger-than-life tuxedo-wearing persona you just mentioned. He isn't the guy writing Anything Goes just yet. He is still figuring out who his audience is, and more importantly, who he is as an artist.
He is actively experimenting with the worlds he longs to inhabit. What stands out most sharply about Washington Square is what it visibly lacks.
Yeah, there's a huge absence of his usual trademarks.
Precisely. It entirely lacks that sharp irony and worldly distance of his mature work. There is no biting punchline at the end of the stanza waiting to undercut the emotion.
Right.
Instead, what we find in the surviving lyric is something remarkably touching. It is a pure, unadulterated romantic fantasy of artistic domesticity, totally free of the defensive sarcasm he would employ later in his career.
You know, I was thinking about this, and I want to push back a little on the idea that just because it lacks his signature cynicism, it might be viewed by critics as a lesser Porter work.
I wouldn't call it lesser at all.
Good, because I think it actually proves a profound emotional range that he later actively chose to hide. It's like when your most sarcastic, witty friend, you know the type.
Oh, the one who always has a deflecting joke ready?
Exactly. The one who never takes anything seriously. And then suddenly, at a wedding, they stand up and give this deeply heartfelt, incredibly vulnerable wedding toast.
Right. And there's not a single joke in it.
Yes. It catches you completely off guard, sure, but it is beautiful precisely because you know how much effort it takes for them to be genuinely earnest. It feels rare.
That is a very fair defense of the piece. It isn't necessarily a lesser work. It is an unprotected one.
Unprotected. I love that word for it.
It shows us that beneath the sophistication he later wore like a heavy coat of armor, there was an acute, painful awareness of human longing. He deeply understood the romantic dream of starting over, long before he learned that the most lucrative way to write about that dream was to playfully mock it.
So true. And to understand why he was writing this way, why this raw longing was right at the surface, we have to look at the world outside his window in 1920.
We absolutely do. The historical context is crucial here.
Because we are just out of the shadow of World War I, and the globe has entirely shifted on its axis. Nothing's the same.
The psychological hangover of the post-World War I era in America, and specifically in a cultural epicenter like New York, cannot be overstated.
Right, it was a collective trauma.
Exactly. You have an entire society that has just witnessed the unprecedented devastation of mechanized global warfare. Millions dead, empires collapsed, mustard gas, trench warfare horrors that were previously unimaginable.
Just a meat grinder of a war.
And because of that, the older Victorian ideals, those rigid, buttoned-up middle-class values of the 19th century that promised safety and progress, they suddenly seemed entirely hollow to the younger generation.
Or outright fraudulent, honestly.
Yes, fraudulent. The institutions that told them how to behave, how to dress, what to value, those are the exact same institutions that sent them into that meat grinder.
Right. The social contract was completely broken. If playing by the rules gets you a mechanized world war, why on earth would you keep playing by those rules?
Precisely. So you see this massive tectonic wave of new artistic movements, new social freedoms, and a deliberate, almost aggressive rejection of convention.
They were just done with the old way.
Completely done. There was a desperate desire for radical reinvention. They didn't want to just tweak the old world. They wanted to build a new one from scratch. Earnestness, political radicalism, and a desperate search for authentic, unmediated experience. These were the driving forces of the era.
And what's so wild is that Porter takes this massive cultural shift, this heavy societal trauma and desire for a new life, and he distills it into a song about, of all things, buying furniture.
It is wonderfully mundane.
It is. To really understand how Porter builds this sincere fantasy, we have to look at how he structures the actual narrative of this young couple's domestic plans. Because the song centers on a narrator who has already started preparing for married life, and the way he goes about it is just hilarious and sweet.
Structurally, the song follows a pattern that Porter would use, and eventually perfect, throughout his entire career.
The verse-refrain structure.
Yes, the verse does the narrative heavy lifting. It establishes the situation, the characters, and the immediate, grounded physical reality. Then the refrain sweeps in to expand that situation into a vivid, soaring, overarching fantasy.
So let's look at the actual lyrics in the verse. The narrator says, and I'm quoting here, "I've started furnishing, I've bought a kettle, I've settled all my plots and plans and gone and purchased pots and pans."
It's so rhythmic.
Right. First of all, the rhythmic momentum there is already undeniably Porter. That conversational bounce of rhyming plots and plans with pots and pans, he is playing with the internal percussion of the English language.
The wordplay is charming, but the narrative device he employs here is even more striking, I think.
What do you mean?
Notice the comedic escalation of the items being purchased. He starts with something small, incredibly cheap, and fundamentally utilitarian.
A kettle.
The absolute bare minimum.
Exactly. It is the absolute bare minimum for domestic survival. With a kettle, you can boil water, you can make tea, you can technically survive. It represents the meager reality of a struggling artist.
But then, swept up in the romance of it all, he abandons mere survival. He's like, I need more. He moves from the kettle to pots and pans.
A logical next step.
Sure, but then suddenly he's buying a sofa, then a chair for two, and finally the grand absurd climax of this shopping spree. A whole bedroom suite.
Escalates very quickly. So quickly. He is transforming ordinary, mundane household purchases into this grand romantic adventure. I mean, he starts at a thrift store mindset and ends up at a luxury department store in the span of 4 lines.
And this is where the genius of the lyric reveals itself, because Porter immediately punctures this escalating fantasy with the cold, hard needle of financial reality.
Oh, the punchline of the verse. It's so good.
He writes, "The bedroom suite's my favorite. I don't know how I'll pay for it, but I don't mind if I've got you."
I don't know how I'll pay for it. That is just so incredibly real.
The practical, terrifying realities of adulthood, debt, collections, eviction are hovering right at the absolute edge of the lyric. But they are completely defeated by this sheer, blinding, romantic optimism.
I love this so much because it reminds me entirely of modern consumer behavior.
Really? How so?
It is exactly like someone sitting on their couch today, pulling up an expensive furniture website and just filling their online shopping cart with $5,000 of imported mid-century modern furniture.
I see.
Right. They are clicking add to cart, purposefully refusing to open a new tab to check their actual bank account balance. They are powered entirely by the delusion of love and aesthetics. They are buying the life they want to project, completely ignoring the life they can actually afford.
I see where you're going with the modern online shopping analogy, but I would argue there is a distinct difference in the underlying psychology here.
Oh, interesting. What's the difference?
Well, today, filling a digital cart is often a solitary act of aspirational consumerism, right?
Right.
It's a way to soothe oneself or maybe project an image on social media.
Yeah, that's true. It's very isolated.
But for Porter's narrator in 1920, the purchasing of these physical items, even on credit he absolutely doesn't have, is an act of shared rebellion. He is building a fortress against the outside world.
Oh, wow. I hadn't thought of it like that.
The furniture isn't just aesthetic. It is the physical manifestation of his commitment to this woman and to their shared bohemian delusion. They are creating their own reality with this bedroom suite.
That makes so much sense. It's world building in a very literal wooden sense. But you don't buy an unpaid-for massive bedroom suite and just cram it into any random apartment. That furniture requires the perfect, culturally loaded zip code to make the fantasy complete.
Geography is everything in a Porter song.
Exactly. Which brings us to the refrain and the geographic shorthand Porter employs. He writes, "We'll take a trip to Washington Square and hire a nice old studio there. A room with a skylight.
Now, to a listener in 1920, Washington Square was not merely a dot on a map, or even just a pleasant park with a stone
It
arch.
wasn't just an address.
Far from it. It was a potent, heavily loaded cultural symbol. As the historic public square anchored at the bottom of Fifth Avenue, it served as the beating heart of Greenwich Village. By this time, it had become entirely synonymous with artists, writers, political reformers, freethinkers, and an aggressively unconventional lifestyle.
I have always been so fascinated by this technique in songwriting. Because why does specific geography do such heavy lifting for a writer? Like, why wouldn't Porter just have the lyrics say, let's move to New York, or let's find an apartment downtown?
It's a risk, certainly,
Yeah, why risk alienating a listener in Ohio who might never have been to Washington Square and might not know what it is?
because naming a highly specific neighborhood instantly injects an entire complex worldview into the listener's mind without requiring a paragraph of clunky exposition. It acts as an incredibly efficient shortcut.
A cultural shorthand.
Precisely. If Porter just says New York, the listener might think of the cutthroat capitalism of Wall Street, or they might picture the blinding lights of Broadway, or even the grueling labor of the shipping docks.
New York is too broad. It means 100 different things.
Exactly. But by explicitly stating Washington Square, he instantly signals creative independence, intellectual rebellion, and a very fashionable, curated sort of poverty. The geography itself is doing the emotional work of the song.
It's a complete vibe check in 2 words. Honestly, it's brilliant. And then he adds the architectural detail of the room with the skylight. Now, a studio with a skylight is the ultimate, almost stereotypical symbol of the starving artist, right?
Oh, absolutely. It's iconic.
It is the cinematic ideal. You can just picture the slanted roof, the rain pattering against the glass, the romantic wooden easel shoved into the corner. But when you think about the reality of 1920s New York real estate, a room with a skylight meant you were on the absolute top floor of a tenement building.
The physical reality was far less romantic than the image. It meant no elevator. It meant trudging up 5 or 6 flights of stairs carrying your groceries or your coal. It meant the room was likely a converted attic space that was boiling hot in the July summer and absolutely freezing cold in the January winter.
Miserable conditions, really.
The only reason artists lived in them was because the rent was dirt cheap and the overhead natural light was good for painting. It was a compromise, not a luxury.
Right. But what is crucial here is that Porter is not mocking the misery of that 6-flight walk-up.
No, not yet.
In his later work, he would take a cliche like the room with a skylight and set it up solely to knock it down with a cynical, biting punchline, about how the roof leaks all over his expensive tuxedo.
Or ruins a perfectly good martini.
Exactly. But here, the aspiration is played totally straight. They genuinely believe that the skylight, the sheer proximity to the stars, will unlock their artistic potential.
The aspiration is so pure. So they have the rented studio, they have the unpaid bedroom suite, and now, to fully legitimize this artistic fantasy, they need to fill the air with the perfect sound.
They need a soundtrack.
They need an auditory backdrop to their rebellion.
And here is where the lyric gets deeply specific regarding technology and media. The refrain continues, "We'll take the world of art as our aim, and keep the victor playing bohème." Let's break this down mechanically first. When he mentions the victor, what exactly is he placing in this tiny apartment?
He is referring to a phonograph manufactured by the Victor Talking Machine Company, most famous for their Victrola models.
A record player.
Yes. Now, we take recorded sound completely for granted today. But you have to consider the staggering cultural shift this machine represented in 1920. Before the widespread adoption of the phonograph, if you wanted to hear symphonic music or an opera, you had to physically go to a theater.
You had to buy a ticket, dress up, sit in a crowd.
Exactly. The Victor allowed average citizens to bring the symphony orchestra into their private domestic space for the very first time. It was revolutionary.
I was looking at this line about the Victor, and it hit me how weird it is that he uses a corporate brand name in the middle of this anti-establishment bohemian daydream.
It is an interesting juxtaposition.
Right. How did a commercial mass-produced record player become part of the starving artist aesthetic? It was kind of like saying, I'll Google it, or let's ask Siri in the 1920s. It's branding.
It is a brilliant paradox. And it's important to remember that the Victor was not a cheap piece of machinery. It was a luxury item, often encased in fine, heavy wood cabinetry.
So they shouldn't even be able to afford it.
Probably not. By placing a Victor in this impoverished studio, Porter is grounding a lofty, poetic fantasy in a very tangible, contemporary, middle-class reality. It highlights the inherent contradiction of the bohemian lifestyle.
What's the contradiction?
They want to reject capitalist society, but they still desperately want the modern conveniences and entertainment that capitalism provides.
Yeah.
They might be poor artists, but they have this modern technological marvel bringing the world to their tiny room.
Oh, that is so spot on. It's like rejecting corporate America, but still insisting on having an iPhone.
Exactly.
And what specific world are they choosing to bring into that room with this machine? They aren't playing jazz, they aren't playing ragtime, which were huge at the time. They're playing bohème, meaning Giacomo Puccini's incredible 1896 masterwork La Bohème.
Puccini's La Bohème is essentially the defining foundational myth of bohemian life.
It's the blueprint.
It really is. It tells the story of struggling, impoverished artists, a poet, a painter, a musician, and a philosopher, living in a freezing garret in the Latin Quarter of Paris in the 1840s. It depicts their fleeting loves, their moments of wild joy, and ultimately, their profound, inescapable hardships. The thematic mirroring here is just off the charts. Like, you have this young, starry-eyed couple sitting in their rented studio in Washington Square in 1920, and what do they listen to? An opera about young, starry-eyed artists in a rented studio in Paris 80 years earlier.
It's a mirror reflecting a mirror.
Yes. They want their life to be, as the lyric explicitly says a few lines later, ecstatic and so melodramatic. By putting La Bohème on the Victor, they are consciously turning their modest little New York apartment into a miniature Parisian salon. They are literally providing the backing track to their own lives.
It demonstrates a fascinating level of meta-awareness from Porter. The characters aren't just living a life, they are actively curating an experience.
Yes, curating.
They are intensely aware of the bohemian archetype, and they are trying to consciously fit themselves into it. But wait, I have to jump in with a reality check here, because if you actually know the plot of La Bohème, it is incredibly, brutally tragic.
Oh, it is devastating.
It is not a fun, lighthearted romp about painting in the sunshine and drinking wine. These characters are literally freezing in their garret. I mean, in the first act, the poet burns his own manuscript, his own art, just to provide 5 minutes of heat in the fireplace.
Yes, the stakes are literal life and death.
Right, and by the end of the opera, the heroine, Mimi, literally dies of consumption tuberculosis, surrounded by her helpless, penniless friends. So I have to ask, are these young lovers in Porter's song actually grasping the harsh, lethal reality of poverty? Or are they just essentially cosplaying as starving artists?
That is the vital question, really.
Yeah.
And the answer is undeniably the latter. They're romanticizing the struggle without understanding the stakes.
They're playing dress-up.
The subtle humor of the song, the faint heartbeat of Porter's developing irony that we talked about, lies in this exact gap. There is a massive, glaring chasm between the brutal, freezing, disease-ridden reality of the opera they are listening to and their cozy, optimistic domestic plan featuring a brand new bedroom suite.
It is exactly like romanticizing van life today on social media.
Oh, the van life phenomenon. Yeah.
Yes, it's identical. You see the perfectly filtered photos of a beautiful couple drinking artisanal pour-over coffee out of the back of a renovated $80,000 Sprinter van. They're parked on a cliffside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. It looks like pure, unadulterated freedom.
It looks idyllic.
But you don't see the reality. You don't see them trying to find a legal place to park overnight without getting a ticket. You don't see them emptying the chemical toilet at a sketchy gas station. Or the sheer panic when the first brutal winter storm hits, the engine won't start, and they're essentially freezing to death in a metal box.
The unglamorous behind the scenes.
Exactly. They want the bohemian aesthetic of living on the road without the tuberculosis of Le Bohème.
While I agree the aesthetic curation is very similar, I'd argue there is a key difference between your van life example and Porter's Bohemians.
Oh, what's the difference?
Modern van lifers are typically trying to escape society, right? To retreat into isolated nature, away from the crowds.
True, it's very isolationist.
The Bohemians of 1920s Washington Square were doing the exact opposite. They were retreating into the densest city on earth to form a hyper-concentrated community. They were trying to rebuild society from within, not run away from it.
Ah, okay, that's a really good point. They wanted an audience.
But your core point absolutely stands. They desire the romance of the struggle without the actual suffering. They want the ecstatic and melodramatic parts of life safely contained within the walls of their studio, strictly orchestrated by the spinning record on their Victor phonograph.
Porter captures this specific Washington Square vibe so perfectly in the song. It's so vivid. But he didn't invent this culture. He observed it. And to truly understand the world he was documenting, we need to zoom out and look at the streets outside that studio.
The broader village scene.
Yes, because the surrounding Greenwich Village culture in 1920 was a boiling cauldron of radical, colorful elements. And our source materials provide a remarkable window into this through a list of unused cultural references.
That's fascinating.
They really are. These are words and concepts from the era that didn't make the final surviving lyric excerpt, but they completely illuminate the exact cultural soup Porter and his audience were swimming in.
These unused references are vital archaeological fragments. They prove that songs of this era, especially Porter's list songs, operated as incredibly dense cultural time capsules.
Totally.
Audiences in 1920 would have instantly recognized every single one of these terms, not just as random vocabulary, but as interconnected pillars of a unified worldview of modernity and rebellion.
So let's dive into these because they paint such a vivid, tactile picture of the era. The outline explicitly mentions batik. Now, I know batik as a traditional fabric dyeing technique, but what did it signify in the context of 1920s Greenwich Village? Why would Porter even consider including it in a song about bohemian life?
Batik is indeed a traditional textile art using wax-resist dyeing techniques, originally associated with places like Indonesia. But we have to ask why Western Bohemians adopted it so fervently.
Right, why that specific fabric?
In 1920, America was rapidly industrializing. Clothing was increasingly mass-produced in factories, it was standardized, and it was sold in large department stores. To the bohemian mindset, this mass production represented a complete loss of soul.
It was too corporate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Batik became a potent visual symbol of anti-commercial authenticity. Because it is a messy, handmade process, no two pieces of batik fabric are exactly alike. Therefore, wearing batik visually signaled that you valued the handcrafted, the artistic, and the nonconformist over the industrial and the uniform.
It was the 1920s equivalent of refusing to buy fast fashion and instead wearing clothing. You, wove yourself on a loom. You are literally wearing your anti-capitalist values on your sleeve.
Precisely. It was fashion as a political statement.
And speaking of the physical manifestation of rebellion, let's talk about hair. Because the reference list includes the phrase, bobs their hair. This is huge.
The bobbed haircut is arguably one of the most potent, explosive visual symbols of the entire decade.
It really was.
It was a blunt cut, typically ending right around jaw level. And to understand its impact, you must remember the context. Victorian and Edwardian women traditionally wore their hair exceedingly long, often piled high in elaborate, heavy Gibson girl styles.
It looked exhausting.
It was. And long hair was not just a fashion choice. It was deeply tied to societal notions of traditional submissive femininity and propriety.
I was thinking about this because a haircut seems so trivial to us today. You go to a salon, you try a new style, and if you don't like it, whatever, it grows back. But in 1920, bobbing their hair was essentially wearing a political manifesto on your head.
It was an act of defiance.
It wasn't just a style, it was a societal shockwave. I mean, preachers gave sermons about the moral decay of women cutting their hair. Husbands tried to legally divorce wives who bobbed their hair without permission.
The backlash was severe.
It symbolized women's growing independence, their entry into the workforce during the war, and a complete, violent rejection of Victorian constraints.
It challenged traditional gender roles, both visually and viscerally. A woman with a bob was signaling that she would not be weighed down, literally or metaphorically, by the expectations of the previous generation.
That's a great way to put it.
And this rejection extended to their clothing, too. The sources mentioned frocks and shirtwaists, which were becoming looser and less restrictive, discarding the corset entirely. But even more scandalous was the peekaboo style mentioned in the research.
Wait, I have to ask, what exactly made a peekaboo style scandalous in 1920? Because that sounds like a baby's game.
Well, the peekaboo style involved sheer fabrics, strategically placed keyhole cutouts, or loose weaves that offer playful, intentional glimpses of skin.
Oh, I see.
A shoulder, a collarbone, the curve of a back. Now, it seems incredibly tame to modern eyes, but it directly and unapologetically challenged the strict modesty and full coverage norms of Victorian fashion. It was an assertion of bodily autonomy and open sexuality.
Wow. This rebellion wasn't just in what they wore, though. It dictated how they spent their evenings and what ideas they consumed. Like, you couldn't wear a radical peekaboo shirtwaist and a bob haircut and then go watch a polite, conservative, Victorian parlor drama.
The aesthetics had to match the intellect.
Exactly. You had to feed that intellectual rebellion. Which brings us to the next reference. A Shaw and an Ibsen matinee.
Ah, yes. George Bernard Shaw and Henrik Ibsen. They were celebrated European playwrights whose works were completely revolutionary for their time.
They weren't doing light comedy.
No, they didn't write lighthearted comedies at all. They wrote brutal critiques of modern society. Ibsen's A Doll's House, for example, ends with a woman walking out on her husband and children to find her own identity.
Which was scandalous.
Earth-shattering at the time. And Shaw constantly explored class hypocrisy and socialist ideals. To attend a Shaw and Ibsen matinee in Greenwich Village was to engage with socially conscious, highly provocative theater. It was where the intellectuals gathered to grapple with the new modern reality.
And they were bringing these heavy ideas out of the theater and directly into their daily lives. The reference list explicitly mentions socialistic ideals. It wasn't just a trend, it was a deeply held belief system for many in the village.
Yes, Greenwich Village was an absolute hotbed for political idealism. Socialist economic and political philosophies, advocating for collective ownership, labor rights, and egalitarian ideals, were widely and passionately discussed within these artistic circles.
It was a very charged environment.
It was part of that overarching desire we discussed earlier, the need to completely restructure society into something fairer and more humane after the trauma of the World War, which, it's worth noting, many of them viewed as the ultimate failure of capitalist imperialism.
So we have the handmade batik fashion, the radical haircuts, the provocative theater, and the socialist politics. But where did this all intersect? Like, where were these massive societal shifts actually being debated over a cup of coffee?
They needed meeting places.
Right. The geography of this subculture is just as fascinating as the ideas themselves. The source details specific, legendary hangouts that made up the physical infrastructure of this movement. Let's talk about the Pig and Whistle.
The Pig and Whistle Cafe was a famous establishment located at 175 West 4th Street. It served as a cozy, convivial haunt for artists, writers, and local bohemians.
What was the vibe there?
What made it unique was its aesthetic. It was designed to echo Old English Tudor taverns, offering hearty fare in a rustic setting. So it provided a space where rustic, old-world charm met modern, radical rebellion, nestled right amid the cobbled streets of the village.
I love the juxtaposition of that. You have people passionately discussing the overthrow of capitalism while eating stew in a Fair Tudor tavern.
It's very charming.
And then you have places with names that sound like they belong in Alice in Wonderland, like the Pink Prune.
The Pink Prune was a small, bohemian tea room. And we really shouldn't underestimate the importance of these tea rooms.
They were significant.
Highly significant. They were typically owned and operated by women, which was revolutionary in itself. They weren't just places to get a cheap meal, they functioned as safe havens and intellectual salons. They were the gathering places for the vibrant countercultural scene to exchange ideas, read experimental poetry, organize political rallies, and basically escape the watchful eye of mainstream society.
That's incredible. And then, because we are entering the 1920s, we have to address the elephant in the room, Prohibition.
Ah, yes. The Great Experiment.
The reference list highlights a place called the Village Inn. How did this fit into the ecosystem?
The Village Inn was a highly notable establishment situated at the intersection of Sheridan Square and 7th Avenue. It became particularly famous, or infamous, during the Prohibition era when the federal government banned the sale of alcohol.
So it's a speakeasy.
It operated as a speakeasy, yes. And its manager, a man named Barney Gallant, became a bona fide local legend.
What made him a legend? Was he just like a really great bartender?
Much more than that.
Hmm.
When the establishment was inevitably raided by authorities for alcohol service violations, Gallant did something extraordinary.
What did he do?
Instead of blaming his workers or fleeing, he took full legal and moral responsibility for his staff. He served a 30-day sentence in the notorious Tombs prison.
Wow, he actually did the time.
He did. And upon his release, he was essentially paraded through the village and dubbed the city's first hero of Prohibition.
That is wild. That story perfectly encapsulates the entire spirit of Greenwich Village at the time, doesn't it? Defiance of authority, fierce loyalty to the local community, and an absolute unyielding refusal to let the federal government dictate their social and cultural lives.
Exactly. It's a perfect microcosm. And when you look at all of these unused references collectively, the Batik, the Bobs, Ibsen, the Pink Prune, Barney Gallant's Defiance, they prove that Porter wasn't just pulling random, convenient rhyming words out of thin air.
He wasn't just making it up.
No, he was a keen sociologist. He was observing and meticulously documenting a living, breathing ecosystem of rebellion and creativity.
So, bringing this all back to our young couple in Washington Square with their unpaid bedroom suite and their Victor phonograph. What does this all mean for us sitting here today in the 21st century?
Why does it matter now?
Yeah, exactly. Why does a 1920 list song still resonate with us? I think it's because Washington Square captures a fleeting, incredibly fragile, beautiful moment in life. A moment where physical poverty is totally eclipsed by infinite possibility. The song isn't really about furniture or record players or even Greenwich Village. It's about the life those things promised.
Porter understood human longing on a molecular level. Long before he became famous for masking that profound longing with his cynical, glittering wit, he knew that everyone needs a dream to survive.
We all need a fantasy.
He knew that we all have our own version of a Washington Square, a specific geographic or aesthetic ideal that we deeply believe will finally unlock our truest, most authentic selves if only we could just get there.
I want you to consider that right now. What is your Washington Square? Is it a secluded cabin in the woods where you'll finally write that novel? Is it an industrial loft in a new city where you'll launch a startup? Is it a Sprinter van parked by the ocean?
The aesthetics change, but the feeling doesn't.
Right. We dress it up differently, but we still chase that exact same feeling of ecstatic escape. And I want to leave you with a provocative thought to mull over on your own today. In 1920, the ultimate, undisputed symbol of this melodramatic artistic dream was a wooden Victor phonograph playing Puccini's tragic opera La Bohème.
The pinnacle of romantic striving for that era.
Exactly. So if a young, starry-eyed couple were writing this exact same song today, right now, what piece of modern technology, playing what piece of modern media, would perfectly encapsulate that same ecstatic bohemian dream? What is the La Bohème of our current decade?
That is a deeply fascinating question to consider. The technology inevitably evolves, the media formats shift from vinyl to digital, but the underlying human yearning remains exactly the same.
It really does. Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration. Remember, click the links in the description to hear the incredible performance of Washington Square, read along with the lyrics, and absolutely grab your copy of the book Porter-Pedia to uncover over 2,000 more hidden histories just like this one. Until next time, keep exploring.